All right, just obviously go over a little bit. Um, Introduce property tax bill this week. A couple key components of it I know we've already discussed, but if there's any further follow-up would be the 2% revenue cap, obviously, and then applying that $25,000 exemption. That's one of the pieces that we felt applies to all residential properties, all homeowners in Iowa, and that's why we went with that plan. As you saw, we passed last night pipeline bill off the floor. That's something we said we wanted to try to get at least some movement to start the conversation with others to hopefully find a solution on, laying out kind of the marker what's important to us as House Republicans. So I would just say those are two things right off the bat that came to mind that I think were productive towards moving session along, but anything else you guys may have. I will preface, I'll try to give you as much feedback as I can on as many bills as possible. We'll see how we do at that point. If I don't have an answer, I'll try to get you one after that. But go ahead.
You have a few years under your belt here. What is your feel for, just as an outsider, we see what you've done with eminent domain, what the Senate is looking at. They don't seem to have a lot of commonality necessarily. So how do you have any level of confidence that something will happen?
So I think that's the positive that I think has come from, there's actually two proposals. There's a proposal in each chamber. We haven't seen many proposals come from the other chamber or even have any level of activity. Leader Clemish has obviously spoken about his involvement in that. I would say, from just kind of to your question of observing how the legislature has just worked in general, that's a positive sign, and that's some of the questions we've answered with the caucus is, where do we see some level of momentum? Well, the momentum in itself is just the fact that both chambers are talking about the issue. That doesn't mean we agree about where we are right now, but if both sides can kind of lay out some of the things that they're important to them, I think that's a positive sign for us to try to find some level of resolution. Now, when that happens, I don't know, but I know that at least gives us something to start from.
And do you have to figure that out before you get to like property tax and other big stuff?
From my perspective, I don't think we should just, regardless of the issue, whether it's property tax, eminent domain, any other thing within there, I don't think we can just say, well, we can't do this because this isn't moving. I think you're going to see us investing time on a lot of those topics at the same time. I don't think we should lay out markers, regardless of the piece of legislation, to say that this has to happen in that order. We will be engaging in those conversations, obviously, as the session moves along. So a timeline I can't say at this point.
Are there components of the Senate proposal that you or your caucus would support, something that you would, support?
Without I'm aware of what the proposal does without having dove so in depth that I can refer to every single section of the bill. What I can say is, as long as the conversation includes eminent domain, regardless of what the Senate has for proposals in it, as long as it has some proper protections in there for landowners, that's been what we've been clear about for several years. We've passed several different bills out of the House. I think from our perspective, we have had a willingness to try different ways of accomplishing a goal. So what I'm looking at is if that wants to be part of the conversation from the House perspective, we'll entertain what that may be, and if it protects property rights, that's going to be where we drive the conversation and recognize that they may have a different approach, but that has to be a part of it.
The House Democrats, after you're done speaking, have a proposal they're going to roll out on water quality.
Well, I think the first thing that I would say to this, because I think this is going to be a common theme that we see, and it looks like it's already started to happen even before this, is we can continue to just get a list of bullet points from the Democrats here in the House without any actual legislation. And I was in the minority once a long time ago, and I suppose you can just do that and say, hey, these are great ideas, but how are you going to pay for them? How are you going to implement them? I think that applies to multiple bullet point sheets that have been sent out. Until we see actual pieces of legislation, it's hard for me to comment on what that may look like, regardless of what the topic, Stephen. But I would say one of the conversations, I've already had these with Secretary Nag, we have to do a better job of telling our story as well. As a state, we're investing as much, if not more, than any other state in the nation in water quality. We have the monitors that are already being done, 60 of them across the state by DNR. We're approved by the EPA for our drinking water. We have to do a better job, not only those of us in agriculture, but in the legislature that have led on these issues, of telling the actual story of what we've done. And I think our plan is to have and invite Secretary Nag over to kind of, as the leader of the nutrient reduction strategy, to share those ideas. So I think some of this is also just saying, what are we doing? Because if you start from the baseline that we're not doing anything, I don't think that that's a fair assumption.
Do you feel like there is a power behind water quality?
Well, like I said, we continue to pass all of the water quality standards. I think it depends what the question is. Some of it, I think, is driven by folks that don't necessarily like agriculture in general and how we do production agriculture, which for our caucus, we're very sensitive to that. I think that we've done a great job of making those investments. I think this conversation has to start from a point, not start from, but continue from a point of what have you done in the state? How many millions of dollars have you invested? What are those things that are changing every day? Anyone that talks to a farmer, ask them what they're doing differently now than even just 5 years ago. So agriculture is changing, and it's a little bit unfair. Where my frustration always comes, we always blame agriculture. I just did it myself, saying it 10 times here. The conversation is much bigger than that if you want to discuss just water quality as a general issue. Really?
There was
Laura, come on. All right, I'm going to go to
no.
you. I'm calling on you now. There. Thank you for bailing me out.
I was
I'm
ready.
not
I
exhausted
was kind
yet.
of waiting for people
Yeah.
to finish up on water quality. So on Tuesday, there was a Senate subcommittee on a bill that was a companion to one of the House tough on crime package. It was a mandatory minimum sentence bill. And there were people there from the Board of Parole and the Department of Corrections who laid out just a long list of potential problems, unintended consequences, code conflicts that could be created. And so specifically, like, why are House Republicans introducing a sentencing bill without conferring with the Department of Corrections and Board of Parole? And then more broadly, do you encourage members of your caucus to consult with subject matter experts when they're having legislation drawn up? Or is it more like, if it's a good idea, throw it out there and let people bring their issues to the subcommittee?
Well, I don't want to consume the entire time. That's something maybe we should spend more time on in other conversations that we have as we do these. First thing I would say, we do get a lot of input. For example, I've had some meetings with, was it last week? I can't remember the date. I had a conversation with the Department of Corrections on a lot of issues facing them, whether it's the impacts of some of our legislation that we're considering. To that point, I just want to let you guys know our plan is to have some of those out next week. So I'm glad you asked that question and reminded me to bring that up. Our plan is to have some of those bill out. As far as what the Senate bill does, I have not taken the time to look at it. I've been spending my time making sure that ours are ready. But we recognize that we have to engage in these conversations. A perfect example would be property taxes, to your question. I've met with the counties, I've met with the cities, I've met with taxing groups. Back home, I've talked to my local elected officials. I think as we do this, even if you folks don't see that we're actively engaging in those conversations, I spend a lot of time in my chair just taking meetings on a daily basis. Sometimes I don't feel like I leave from taking so many of those meetings. So I think, and we have an open subcommittee process, I would say too. The open subcommittee process that anyone can come to with an interest in any piece of legislation, that's a choice if experts in the fields want to engage or not. We can invite whoever we want, but they still have to decide where they want to come.
There's a lot of
I'll go to you next.
there's a lot of higher education bills that we're seeing go through the House right now. Can you just talk a little bit about, maybe why we're seeing all of these pieces of legislation, and if there are any that are, higher priority than maybe some of the other ones?
Yeah, I think that as you see some of these bills moving through the committee, I would hope that none of our committee chairs are just passing bills because we don't think they're important. So I don't, some are going to have different level of support in the caucus, some are going to have different levels of interest. This gets back to part of why I created the two different committees. I know there's been a lot of attention on the number of bills coming out of the Higher Education Committee, but part of the reason why I think you're seeing more focus on this is because we've put more time and invested more time into the topic of higher education, where before I think the Education Committee was monopolized by other issues, not in a negative way necessarily, but we've had more time to devote to that. So I think that's why you've seen a lot of bills out of that committee. Ultimately, we're just making sure that our universities are a place where everyone feels welcome. We're making sure that our universities are a place where they can have an affordable education. I shouldn't just pick on the universities. They won't like me saying that, but all of higher education, making sure there's a place where there's affordability. One of the things you guys have heard me say a lot, and then we've continued to engage in conversations, is making sure that Iowa kids can get in. There's a couple bills dealing with that. Iowa kids can get in, making sure that Iowa kids are staying here in the state. I think some of the added conversation on the higher ed and all the number of bills is the fact that we did break off a separate committee.
One of those bills would institute an endowment tax, endowments over $250 million. I'm interested in your perspective on this because this was something that was potentially going to be included at the federal level in the big beautiful bill, and that Senator Grassley, your grandfather, made sure was not included in the form that it was originally proposed. Why bring that up now?
Well, you must not ask me for any advice. Don't you think that's what the problem? I'm kidding. Now you're going to say that, yeah, he's much smarter than I am. But what I would say is, as far as that, like a lot of those other bills, I think it's worth us at least having that discussion. Obviously, the federal government works very differently than we have. One of the key things that I think, part of in my conversations with Representative Collins, in fact, this week, that I think is important to it is, if we were to go down a path of looking at this, it's going to be used to reinvest that in the scholarships for Iowans. to making sure that they're in these high demand fields, they're staying in the state of Iowa. I think if that's where the conversation is trying to get us to, it's worth having. I don't think there's been a decision made on whether that will make it all the way through, but I think from my perspective, that's something that if we can provide more support to those students that want to go into those fields, we should at least entertain those, and that's one option I think that Representative Collins has brought forward.
There's a subcommittee this afternoon in the House on a bill that would allow pharmacists to dispense ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine. Governor Reynolds has said that she has a similar bill coming up on ivermectin, at least. Is this a priority for your caucus, and if so, what?
I don't think I can't give you the gauge the interest whether it would be a priority. If I say it's a priority and speak before we've had a caucus on it, I would just say that I think there is a level of interest in doing that. If I remember, I think we had a bill last session that maybe discusses, I don't know, I'm trying to get my bills confused, but I think that there is a level, at least to continue this conversation. How much of a priority? I don't want to get out in front of the caucus and having it not made it through the committee process.
For the people who do want to see this, what's the what they see as the benefit?
Oh, I think that you can, if you do a lot of investigating and reading into some of the effects and the uses that it's been used, especially here in the recent years, I think you can make an argument that being able to access it, I think we have a lot of Iowans accessing it in other manners right now. So I think that's some of the conversation. Again, until it gets probably a little down the track, I probably have maybe a better direction that the caucus wants to go with this. But that's something that at least that I think they want to continue that conversation.
The governor is also planning to bring up discussions on how do you feel like prospects are this year in the House?
Well, I said, was it last year, or the year before? In the last some of these open forums, I said I'd be open to having that conversation. Whether it involves a conversation like ivermectin and other things, I'm open to having that conversation. Again, I don't know where the caucus may be because it's something that we haven't probably delved as deep into as we did in past years. So at this point, I would have an openness to that conversation, but ultimately it's going to be a decision of the caucus.
Where is your caucus on extending the restrictions on schools teaching, promoting curriculum related to gender identity or sexual orientation to grades 7 through 12?
Is that referencing the Senate bill?
But I think there is a similar bill in.
I think there was some activity this week, if I remember right,
on
the Senate side.
On the Senate
Again,
side.
I try not to track too much what's going over there, but I am aware of that. We landed in a spot with K through 6 that we felt was a reasonable spot in that conversation a few years ago. Again, if the caucus wants to continue that conversation, but I think where we landed, I think was a good spot where we could get at that time. What the caucus wants to do on potentially going further, there was different input, and that's kind of where we landed on that. So at this point, probably a little early for me to give any feedback on what the direction of that could be.
Last one.
One. Yeah.
Do you have any big plans for next week? You already have eminent domain this week and property tax bill.
No, I think I have not even gotten that far into next week yet. I think a lot of, back to the original question that was asked, I think you're going to see a lot of sitting down. My hope for me would be, have some conversations, continue conversations, and have more conversations with the Senate on property taxes, on things like eminent domain. So I think, from my perspective, there'll be a lot of activity in the legislature, but for what I'm kind of investing my time on, I think it's going to be getting those balls rolling.
Just logistically, Tuesday, do you expect to back off the schedule for people who might want to go to President Trump's event, or is that not in your schedule?
I don't know if I have any level of details. I haven't had that conversation with staff. I mean, that's something we may consider, but I don't have enough details to even give you good feedback. All right, thank you.